Chapter 11, Vision Unlimited. One evening, Patty leaned over and whispered in my ear, "We're going to have a baby." We were naturally very excited, but I knew that if Patty was to give proper care to a baby, she would have much less time for me. For instance, she would not be as free to drive me to recording studios, clubs, and other places where I worked as an artist. We were now living near Hollywood. I would need to be more independent, so I told Patty that I thought it was time for me to have a seeing eye dog. We had a friend who bred German shepherds, and we went to his house to see him. The friend took us to his kennels, and as soon as he opened the gate, 9 little bundles of fur ran toward us. The puppies were less than a month old. I knelt down on the ground, and the puppies licked my hands and face. Then one puppy pushed its way past its brothers and sisters and rested its head on my knee. I knew at once that this was the puppy I wanted. Turning to our friend, I said, "This one seems to know me already." "Oh, that's Heidi," said our friend. "Yes, she has been very special since the day she was born." "In what way?" I asked. "Well, Heidi just loves people. She seems to prefer people to her mother and to her brothers and sisters. I guessed you'd find Heidi." "I didn't find her," I replied. "Heidi found me." Patty and I took Heidi home. Heidi followed me everywhere. She even tried to get into my bed. She seemed to say, "I'm not just an ordinary dog. I was born to be your friend and companion. I was born to be your eyes." Patty told me that Heidi was gray and brown, and that her ears were always pointed and alert, and that she never took her eyes off me. But seeing eye dogs need to have special training. They have to learn words of command and to protect their master or mistress against all dangers, especially the danger of traffic. They have to get used to a special U-shaped harness. We knew that we would have to send Heidi to a school for seeing eye dogs. One of the best schools for training seeing eye dogs is in North Hollywood. The head of the school, Mr. Erich Renner, had commanded German U-boats in World War II. We went to see him. "No," said Mr. Renner, "I'm sorry, but I cannot take Heidi into my school. Anyway, I only train dogs that I breed myself." "But Heidi is special," I protested. Then Mr. Renner explained how he selected puppies to be trained as seeing eye dogs. He told me how he knew, even when the puppies were only a few weeks old, whether or not they would make good guide dogs. There are some puppies that are aggressive. They are born fighters. These dogs are often trained to be police dogs. Other dogs are just meant to be family pets. We never cuddle the puppies that are to be trained as seeing eye dogs or police dogs, he explained. The lives of people like you, Tom, and police officers, may depend on the discipline, training, intelligence, and independence of our dogs. "But Heidi is very intelligent, and I'm sure she can be trained quite easily," I pleaded. Mr. Renner put his arm on my shoulder and said sympathetically, "I can see that Heidi is a magnificent dog. I only wish I had had her here when she was a puppy. But there is another reason why you would not want to leave Heidi in my school. You might not get her back. We try to match dogs to people, and she might be better suited to someone else. It wouldn't be wise to give a playful, energetic dog to an older person. An older person would need a quieter, steadier dog." I was very disappointed, but I knew Mr. Renner was a famous dog trainer and knew what he was doing. He was very enthusiastic about his work and took it extremely seriously. He went on to explain how he trained his German shepherds. The real training starts when they are about 10 months old. One of the first lessons is teaching a dog to stop at a curb. Training schools for dogs have recently adopted a new method of training or conditioning. In the old days, the dog trainer tugged at the leash when a dog reached a curb. Now the trainers use a special collar wired in such a way as to give the dog an electric shock whenever it does anything wrong. The trainer uses a small radio transmitter to control the device. When the trainer presses a button on the transmitter, 2 metal prongs on the dog's collar give a sharp jolt to the dog. The collar is also used to train the dog not to chase cats or other animals. At Mr. Renner's school, they have a Siamese cat that deliberately teases the dogs under training. When a dog growls and starts to chase the cat, the trainer presses the transmitter button. The dog gets an 80-volt shock and stops at once. In a very short while, the dog understands that cats must not be chased. If a seeing-eye dog was fond of chasing cats or other dogs or squirrels or cars, the blind person might find himself stranded, perhaps in the middle of a busy street. A seeing-eye dog under training is taught to watch out for all dangers that might be encountered by a blind person. For instance, a dog is taught to avoid obstacles that might hurt its owner. If a dog were to take its master under a low shop awning, the blind person might bruise or cut his head. At the school, the trainers rig up low obstacles made of bamboo, and if the dog goes near the obstacles, the bamboo falls on top of the dog with such a terrible clatter that the dog avoids low obstacles in the future. Noise training is also important. Mr. Renner said, "We take a dog to a public school at the time of recess. When the children pour out of the classrooms, the dog must learn to keep calm and to guide his master through the crowd. The training comes in handy when a blind person goes to a football game or to a busy airport." "What about unexpected noises like a car backfiring?" I asked. "Very important," agreed Mr. Renner. "We fire guns just over the heads of dogs in training. The first time the dog is frightened and cowers, but a good dog soon understands that, although she doesn't like the noise, she must take no notice of it. Can you guess, Tom, what the toughest test is?" "Traffic," I suggested. "No, it's the noise of jet planes. We take the dogs to the Los Angeles International Airport, and we have special permission to go right onto the runway. The dog has to learn not to retreat when the jets scream for takeoff." "But the dogs must be frightened," I suggested. "Oh, sure," said Mr. Renner, "but their training to look after their master must be stronger than their greatest instinct, fear. One thing that always frightens a dog to start with is going up and down a fire escape. The dog can see through the iron steps and know how far he has to fall. But it must learn to be unafraid, because the day may come when the dog might have to rescue its master or mistress from a blazing building." Mr. Renner told me that it takes up to 8 months and hundreds of dollars to train one guide dog. By the time a dog is ready to be handed over to a blind person, it is probably the most highly trained animal in the world. "A seeing-eye dog cannot speak, but it can understand about 30 words, said Mr. Renner. "What words?" I asked. "The first word it learns is the same as that a baby learns. The word is no. Then we say, 'Good girl,' if she does the right thing. Or 'Good boy,' I laughed. "In our school, we train only females to be guide dogs," replied Mr. Renner. "We have found that females make the best dogs for blind people." "What happens to the male dogs?" I asked. "They are trained to be police dogs, or else we give them away." "So the girls are better than the boys," I exclaimed. "For people like you who need eyes," replied Mr. Renner. "But for other tough jobs like police work, the males can be just as good or better than the females." Mr. Renner then told me how German shepherds are employed to track down drug smugglers, burglars, and lost children. He recounted many stories of how dogs make great detectives. I particularly liked the story about a police dog called Ziska, who was taken to a supermarket because 2 robbers were known to be hiding inside the building. Ziska went straight to the dog food counter and started barking. The store manager sneered that Ziska was obviously more interested in his stomach than in catching crooks. They took Ziska outside the store and again ordered him to find the crooks. A second time, he went straight to the dog food counter. On the 3rd try, the same thing happened. They decided to give Ziska one more try. Ziska shot into the supermarket and back to the dog food counter. But this time he began to tear away at the big sacks of dog food. Concealed behind the sacks, Ziska found the 2 thieves. The police soon put handcuffs on the crooks, and the store manager was so pleased that he gave Ziska a month's supply of the very best dog food. Then Mr. Renner told me about a seeing-eye dog called Helga that he had given to a blind college student, Herb Smith. One day, a professor at the college noticed that Helga was tugging at the student, and it was obvious that the student wanted to go in the opposite direction. The puzzled professor asked, "Is there something wrong with your dog, Herb? Can I help?" "Oh, no," replied Herb. "Helga knows that I'm late for my French class, but I was figuring on skipping class today." I laughed and suggested that perhaps Helga wanted to learn French. "That's not quite as funny as it may sound," said Mr. Renner. "We train dogs to understand Spanish for blind Spanish-speaking people. You could train an intelligent dog to understand basic words in any language, even Chinese." I could have listened to Mr. Renner all day, but I remembered the main purpose of my visit and tried once more. If only you understood what it's like to be blind, I know you'd accept Heidi at your school. Oh, but I do know what it's like, replied Mr. Renner. To better understand the problems faced by blind people, I once blindfolded myself for 6 weeks. During that period, I never took the blindfold off. The experience was invaluable to me as a trainer. It's exactly because I do understand your difficulties and needs so well that we train our German Shepherds to be super dogs. When one of my assistants comes to me and reports that he has a dog ready to be given to a blind person, I ask, "Okay, would you give this dog to your mother or your brother if he or she were blind?" Often the assistant will shake his head and take the dog back for more training. "But I still don't understand why you won't take Heidi," I protested. "Because you love Heidi," said Mr. Renner, "and because she loves you. If Heidi were trained here, we might find that she was not the best dog for you. If you handed Heidi over to me now, you might never see her again." "I couldn't bear that," I replied, "nor could Patty." "That's what I thought," said Mr. Renner. "But I've got an idea. One of America's most successful dog trainers has just retired. He now breeds German Shepherds in Tucson, Arizona. He just might agree to train Heidi. I'll give you his name and address." 2 days later, I flew with Heidi to Tucson, to the home of Mr. John Webb, who has spent a lifetime training seeing eye dogs. It was Mr. Webb who opened the first guide dog school in Mexico. I explained to Mr. Webb what my problem was and how the Guiding Eyes School in Hollywood had refused to train Heidi unless I took the risk of giving her up to another blind person. Mr. Webb listened to me and then said firmly, "I don't train dogs anymore. I'm retired. I want time to go fishing. A dog trainer works 7 days a week, and I think I've earned my retirement." Mr. Webb saw my disappointment, but I knew he was watching Heidi closely. Suddenly he said, "You have a very handsome dog. She looks intelligent. I'll tell you what I'll do. You leave Heidi with me for 2 months. If after that time I think she'll make a good guide dog, I might agree to train her. I don't I don't want you to see Heidi again until I telephone you." Heidi seemed to understand our conversation. She came to me and rested her head on my knees. Then she padded across the room and sat down by Mr. Webb. I missed Heidi terribly when I flew back to Los Angeles. Every day I wanted to phone Mr. Webb to find out how she was getting along, but I didn't dare. Then, 2 months later, Patty answered the telephone and called breathlessly, "Tom, Mr. Webb is on the phone." My heart was pounding when I picked up the phone. "Well," I asked, "is it good news?" Mr. Webb paused. Then he said, "You must have the most intelligent German Shepherd I have ever handled, and I've handled hundreds of dogs." So that was that. Heidi had passed her first exam. Then, for the next 3 months, I thought of Heidi undergoing all that hard training which Mr. Renner had spoken about. I knew that she would have to learn at least 30 words, such as forward, left, right, bus stop, telephone, elevator, wait, outside, inside, car. At last the day came when Mr. Webb telephoned again. He said simply, "Tom, come and pick up your seeing eye dog. Perhaps you've forgotten her name. She's called Heidi." I will never forget the moment when Heidi and I met again. I heard the running of padded feet. Then a warm, furry body was pressed against my legs. Heidi was trembling from excitement. She seemed to be trying to tell me how proud she was that she'd graduated, and she now understood why we'd been separated for so long. Mr. Webb said, "Look after her because she's going to look after you. Heidi is no longer just a friendly German Shepherd. She is your eyes." I spent a month with Mr. Webb, who taught me all the things that he had taught Heidi. I learned the words that Heidi would understand. Mr. Webb taught me how to strap on and use the special harness that guide dogs wear when they are working. He demonstrated how Heidi, when she was in harness, should always walk about half a pace in front of me. I began to feel that Heidi was part of me. I felt safe with her, even when crossing a busy street. By the time our daughter, Blythe, was born, Heidi was taking me almost everywhere so that Patty could spend much more time with our baby. I often flew from Los Angeles to New York for concerts and recordings, and I always took Heidi with me. When I arrived at the airport in a cab, Heidi knew exactly where to take me. to the counter to buy my ticket, onto the plane, through the swinging doors of a hotel, and even to my room. When I gave a concert, Heidi took me to the piano on the stage and sat beside me. She thumped her tail when the audience applauded. Heidi loves to play with the ball, but she soon discovered it was no good dropping the ball at my feet, where I usually couldn't find it. On her own, she started tossing the ball with her mouth right at my stomach or into my lap. When I went swimming or water skiing, Heidi never took her eyes off me. She sat on the beach and barked a warning if she felt I was swimming too far out of my depth. Once when I was water skiing, I hit a log and fell with a big splash. The pilot of the speedboat did not at first realize I was floundering in the water. Suddenly, I felt a tug at my life preserver. Heidi had come to my rescue. She began to pull me toward the edge of the lake. We laughed about this incident because I was not really in danger of drowning, but Heidi wasn't taking any chances. One day, Heidi really did save my life. I had gone for a walk and was returning home when a car screamed around the corner at the end of our street. Heidi had started to guide me across the road to my house. She saw the danger. The car was traveling too fast to avoid running me down. Heidi sprang at my chest and hurled me backward to the sidewalk. I heard a sickening thud. Heidi had been hit. The driver of the car didn't stop. Heidi was lying beside me, whimpering. When I felt out with my hands to pat her and to tell her how grateful I was for her saving me from injury or death, I felt her fur wet with blood. Patty had heard the screech of car tires. She came running across the street and put her arms around me. "I'm okay," I said. "I wasn't hit, but what's happened to Heidi?" Patty turned to Heidi and saw the horrible gaping wound where the fender of the car had ripped her side. Heidi was shivering and whimpering, but she had enough strength to lick my face when I bent over her. It was as if she were saying, "I did my duty. I saved you, master." "Good girl," I assured her. "You're a very good girl." Patty and I carried the limp form of Heidi to our car, and we drove at once to the nearest animal hospital. The veterinary surgeon was grave. "We'll x-ray her at once and find out how badly she's hurt," he said. Patty and I waited on a bench for the doctor to return. It seemed like hours, but I guess it was only about 20 minutes before the doctor walked briskly down the corridor. He said, "Your dog is going to be all right. She's badly bruised, and I had to put in 20 stitches to close up the wound, but there are no broken bones. She will recover." Poor Heidi limped for a month. Then one morning I felt the ball land in my lap. Heidi was ready to resume her duties as a seeing-eye dog. But the accident brought us even closer. How do you describe a friend who has saved your life at the risk of her own?